All right then, Callum, is Callum on doing the recording? Kick off. You on, Callum? Okay. Good evening and welcome. This is a odd evening because we've got an executive and an extraordinary executive meeting rolling one into the other. So we will, after the executive meeting, please stay on and we'll follow with the extraordinary executive meeting rather than go off and then come on again in another meeting. Please ensure that any mobile devices or mobile phones are switched off. If you're not speaking or being asked to speak, please mute your microphones. If you do not, your microphone will be muted for you. To assist people viewing the meeting, could everyone turn off their cameras and only turn them on when speaking? And also introduce themselves whenever they speak. My name is John Halsall. I'm the leader of the council. At the executive meeting are the executive, Charles Margetts, who is the executive member for Adult Services, Shard Haytham-Taylor, who's the executive member for Regeneration, Gregor Murray, who's the executive member for I can't remember what the title is actually. Resident Services and Climate Change. John Kaiser, who's the Deputy Leader and Executive Member for Finance. Parry Bath, who's the Executive Member for the Environment. Pauline Jorgensen, for the Executive Member for Highways. And Ulla Corinne Clark, who's Executive Member for Children's Services. And Wayne Smith, who's the Executive Member for Planning and Enforcement. To ensure the smooth running of the meeting, could members wishing to speak please use the hands up facility on Teams. Please be reminded that the public and members who are not in the executive are not entitled to speak unless I, the chairman, asks them to. Also, there are strict limits on the time to speak, which is 1 minute. No question to the executive should contain more than 200 words. The time allotted to the public questions is limited to 30 minutes. A questioner who's put a question in person may also put one supplementary question without notice to the member who has replied to his or original question, but must not include any new subject matter. A supplementary question may arise directly out of the question or the reply. The chairman, me, may reject a supplementary question on any grounds if he feels that the new subject matter is being introduced. No person answering a question shall speak longer than 1 minute. If the chairman considers that the questioner is making a statement, he may rule that the questioner be not further heard, and I will mute you. Please note that the meeting is currently being webcast live and it is a window on how the council works. Apologies for the meeting from Stuart Monroe. Can I ask members to agree or not agree or make amendments to the minutes if they have any? Are there any amendments to the minutes for members of the executive? No, then could I propose the minutes and could somebody second them, please?
I'll second them, John.
So that's Charles, isn't it? Parry. Thank you. You're very, very mute, Parry. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay, let me move on to the public question times. Jenny, a question to Parry.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the question standing in my name, please.
Right.
Jenny, please could you read the question, because people who are listening in on the recording won't know what the question is.
Okay, I'm asking this question on behalf of the Woking Waterside Centre Board, of which I'm a member. Since April this year, there has been tremendous use of the beautiful open space between the Waterside Centre and Thames Valley Park Nature Reserve. The majority of people spending the whole day there and sometimes overnight as well. Soon the park and ride to the rear of the Waterside Centre will be open. As agreed with this council earlier this year, Waterside Centre has one toilet on the outside of the building for use only with a radar key. The outcome of this is, unfortunately, that people are using land adjacent to the campsite at WWC and possibly the nature reserve to relieve themselves. WWC trustees, board members find this unacceptable and ask that you find a way to provide properly working public toilets in a location appropriate to this sensitive location by the River Thames National Park.
Thank you, Jenny. That's very kind of you for your question. I must admit I've used that location myself during very sunny days, and it is very pleasant out there. But tracing on the history, going back to 2009, and in line with many other authorities throughout the country, the council took the decision to stop providing standalone public toilet facilities and instead established a local loo scheme where local businesses and other facilities such as council offices make their toilets available for public use. This decision was taken because these toilets were costly to maintain due to regular incidents of vandalism and graffiti. The toilets also attracted antisocial behaviour and were often closed to the public for repairs. The approach has worked well for many years and has proved a more efficient way of ensuring access to toilets throughout the borough. Now, due to the size and semi-rural nature of our borough, it is not practical for the council to provide public toilet facilities in every location where residents may want. We urge everybody and everyone who lives in and visits our beautiful borough to adhere to the laws around public decency and to report any instances where this isn't happening to the police. That concludes my answer, Jenny.
Do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. We were part of the local loo scheme, but that's the reason that there was a discussion with the council earlier this year, and one of the toilets was closed because it could not cope with the usage and was broken. That is why there is now only one toilet for use with a radar key. So there were local loos available there. The Waterside Centre was paid to run them, but now there is only one for those with disabilities. So you're kind of not quite up to date with the latest usage of these things. And I wondered if we could perhaps have some progress made on this with a meeting, either with yourself or with the relevant officer, to discuss a way forward. Otherwise, the situation can only get worse. It's not acceptable to have people using the Waterside Centre grounds as a public toilet.
I totally agree, Jenny. There's a need for everybody to be responsible for their own behaviour, especially at this time when resources are spread so thin for us as an authority and the police. Essentially, the point is, why should the council spend more money responding to the behaviour of a few people who spoil the experience of people, the vast majority visiting the area near the Thames? But I'm very happy to meet you offline with the appropriate officer to discuss this further.
Thank you, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Arya Bobola, I hope I pronounced your name right. Your question to me. I think you have to unmute yourself, Mr. Bobola. Hello, Mr. Bobola. You need to, it is a Mr., I think. You need to unmute yourself, please. Let me move on to the next question. I hope that Mr. Bobola can make it because he is here. Tracy Stone, I see that you're here. Please ask your question to me.
Chairman, I think Tracy Stone's had difficulty and has dropped out of the meeting, so it may be worth going to Daniel Hinton and then we'll see if we can go back.
Yep. Daniel, please ask your question of the Resident Services Communications and Emissions Executive Member, Gregor.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Murray. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, you can. Okay, thank you. Councillor Murray, the paper you're presenting tonight seeks to help alleviate the effects of fuel poverty on some of the most vulnerable at risk and lowest income households across our borough. Please can you confirm how recipient households will be identified and what criteria will be used when deciding how to prioritise households? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Hinton. As you mentioned, this scheme has been developed to help those in most need and seek to help alleviate fuel poverty and improve energy efficiency of households locally. Woking Council has 949 HRA properties in the E, F and G bands. These are the 3 least energy efficient bands. In addition, from the databases, we can identify additional older properties that could benefit from this scheme. Together, there is a combined figure of 1,809 properties. These homes form the target group, which we will review against the eligibility criteria for this scheme. Our local knowledge and experience will be essential in identifying those properties with the greatest need from across the borough, and we will focus on these households first. These properties will receive a letter to invite those who meet the eligibility criteria to contact us. We will liaise with housing departments to target those on benefits or council tax benefits or could also benefit from this. To be eligible, households must receive 1 or more benefits listed in the Home Heating Cost Reduction Obligation, also known as the Affordable Warmth Obligation. The Council will use directly targeted letters to invite residents to respond. We have used this system before and it is tried and tested. Upon the response, we will confirm eligibility criteria and arrange a visit and survey to establish costings and customer approval. We want to achieve as widespread an uptake as possible to ensure that energy efficiency measures are installed in as many eligible households as possible. The energy company obligation grants are paid directly to the eco-installers rather than to the household or HRA company. This guarantees that residents will benefit from the efficiency upgrades without either themselves or the council having to contribute financially. As a council, we have set aside £30,000 of pre-budgeted money to meet funding gaps should for any reason an identified household not be eligible for 100% grant of works.
Thank you, Gregor. Daniel, do you have another question?
I do, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Gregor. Just to clarify, for clarity, could you please confirm if this is the same or if it's a different scheme to the government's Green Homes grant scheme? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so I'm really pleased to say that this is actually very separate to the government Green Home Grants scheme, although many of the same houses would be eligible for both. And I actively advise any resident in the borough who is a homeowner to check out simpleenergyadvice.org.uk as a website to see whether or not they would be eligible for a Green Home Grant, which is money paid by the government in order to make environmental upgrades to your home. So I've applied myself for grant money to put solar panels on the roof of my house, which will help fund my heating bill and should bring it down by about 25%, hopefully. And I actively encourage any householder across the borough to apply for this completely separate scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I see that the questions to me, the questioners are not here. They've been coming in and out. So what I propose to do is to read the question and answer the question for both questions, because they're both directed to me, as if the individuals were here. So the first question was to me and says, knowing what you have said about Black Lives Matter, what were you thinking when you tried to commandeer a Black Lives Matter banner for your photo ops at the BLM for protest against for what you said and stand for in Elmsfield in August? The answer would have been, thank you very much for your question. I'm really pleased, as it allows me to articulate the council's and therefore my approach to these issues. As the leader of the council, I have a duty to all residents to understand their views and do everything in my power to ensure the council upholds its equalities duties. My previous comments about Black Lives Matter have been misconstrued, although I accept they may have been open to an interpretation that I did not intend. I also wish to acknowledge that there is always space for all of us, including myself, to educate ourselves and grow in an understanding of each other. Firstly, and most importantly, we are an organisation committed to anti-racism, promoting equality and celebrating diversity. The staff and all the members of the council wish to be at the forefront of best practice. If there is an area in which we are deficient in these aims, we wish to know it, to address it if we can, and create a better quality of life for all our residents. I believe I speak on behalf of all councillors. I came to England as a boy speaking little English and suffered prejudice and abuse because of my origins of speech. In the 50s, those prejudices were very real. Black Lives Matter is an idea, a philosophy, a moral code and a movement. The idea, philosophy and moral code are central to what we believe we are and I am. The Black Lives Matter rally in Elmsfield was a public meeting held on Borough Council land managed by the Town Council. It was advertised as peaceful and welcoming meeting. The organisers knew that the Deputy Chief Executive and I had accepted their invitation and would be there. Indeed, they had welcomed us and came to greet us. The first speaker acknowledged my presence by mischaracterising me as having associated the murders in Forbury Gardens with the BLM march that day in Reading. At the time, I explicitly, publicly and frequently said there was no association between those two events, and I've repeated this regularly. Indeed, the police have also expressed that assertion. I have apologised freely and openly to anyone who's misconstrued what I've said and have thereby taken offence. I did not commandeer the flag, as you suggest. In fact, I was invited to join my council colleagues who were holding the flag when an individual in a mask snatched their flag from them and ran away. I was saddened to witness that, as it lowered the tone of what was otherwise a peaceful and powerful event. And so I fear that you have been misinformed about the incident. Please join me in striving to make the quality of life in all our community better. Our mission as the Borough Council and mine as an individual is committed to anti-racism, promoting equality and celebrating diversity, improving where we can the quality of life of all our residents and helping residents in their pursuit of happiness. Please, area, join us as part of the solution, and many thanks again for raising this question. Is Tracy now here or not?
Mr. Babola is here, Chairman.
That was the question. Is he? Do you have a supplementary question? Mr. Babola? No? Okay. So Tracy Stone asked me the following question. You have made statements on national television and made postings on your Facebook page which could appear racist and has spread a fear, alarm and distress to many people of all ethnicities, but particularly black residents living in Woking District. As the leader of a public body, why did you do this? Again, I welcome the question. It is really great to have the opportunity to restate the council's and my position. In my answer to the previous question and at council meeting on 23rd July, I've sought to clarify my position, but I'm happy to reiterate this as this is a very important issue for our community. I completely support the message, principles and the aims of Black Lives Matter in the UK. I have always been opposed to discrimination in all its forms. I understand the need to have a clear focus on tackling racism where it is found. If any comments that I've made have been offensive to anybody, then once again, I apologise unreservedly. That was never my intention. Rather, by reaching out, we had hoped to bring residents together. Firstly, and most importantly, we are an organisation committed to anti-racism, promoting equality and celebrating diversity. The staff and all the members of the council wish to be at the forefront of best practice. If there is an area in which we are deficient in these aims, we wish to know it, to address it if we can, and create a better quality of life for all our residents. I have never made statements on national television. There was a piece which was selectively extracted from an executive meeting mixed in a feature on South Today. My postings on Facebook were not racist, and indeed I've gone to great lengths to clarify any possibility of misunderstanding or misinterpretation. I've also apologised if I inadvertently caused offence amongst any community. I would never knowingly do so. Unfortunately, your question is phrased in a way which is incorrect and mischaracterises my words and actions. The diverse nature of the British population is a beautiful thing and something we can and should be proud of. We can experience incredible cultures from the far reaches of the world with greater clarity and depth than any generation before us. We live together with people who have stories drastically different to ours. These are all aspects of diversity worth encouraging, enjoying and celebrating because we are lucky to be able to do so. Our mission as a borough council and mine as an individual is committed to anti-racism, promoting equality and celebrating diversity and improving where we can the quality of life of all our residents and helping residents in their pursuit of happiness. Please, Tracy, if you're there, join us as part of this solution, and many thanks for raising this question again. Thank you. Is Tracy there to answer a supplementary, ask a supplementary?
No, Chairman.
Okay, well, thank you. The fifth question was withdrawn. So if I can move swiftly on to members' question time, there's a whole load of members' questions. And I doubt that we will get through all of them. So be conscious that if you'd ask supplementaries or long supplementaries, you would prevent somebody from asking a question. But the first question is Gary Cowan.
Hi, good evening. I'll ask the question standing in my name. That will help you along.
Please read it, Gary, because nobody, or I'll read it because people who are listening in don't know the question. Would you like me to read it?
I'm happy to read it. The government has introduced new regulations, some of which came into force on the 22nd of July. One in particular gives CIL charging authorities a discretion for a limited period of time to defer CIL payments, to disapply late payment interest and surcharge payments, and to credit interest already charged to developers. What impact will this have on existing planning applications along with the council's ability to deliver on infrastructure and climate emergency programs? Thank you.
Evening, Gary, it's Wayne here. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, the Community Infrastructure Levy, in brackets Coronavirus Amendment, England Regulation 2020, are now in force. These temporary regulations will remain in force until the 31st of July 2021. They are aimed at helping small and medium-sized developers with an annual turnover of less than 45 million who are experiencing financial difficulties because of the effects of COVID-19. The regulations enable changing authorities to defer payments for up to 6 months to temporarily disapply late payment interest and to provide discretion to return interest already charged where they consider it appropriate to do so. The regulations can apply to any payment that fall due after the 21st of March 2020. The request should be made in writing no earlier than 14 days before the SIL payment is due. The council can request further information, which should be provided within 14 days of the request. The council can grant or refuse the request. A deferral for up to 6 months from the date of the request was received. If the request is refused, the developer has 7 days from the date of refusal to make a SIL payment. There is no right of appeal against a refusal. We have published a Q&A and application form for those seeking deferred SIL payments on our website, and I will follow this up. I will send this to you, Gary, so I won't read it out because it's just, you know, a series of, it's just a link, so I'll send it to you. Any applications for deferrals will be required to demonstrate their need for a deferral is a direct result of COVID-19, including by submission 2 years of audited accounts and a written financial impact statement. To date, we have not received any applications for a deferral of payment through this route. For the most part, developers operating in Woking Borough are national house builders who do not qualify for the deferral under the scheme. So it is not anticipated that will be very many or impacted by the development's proposals. There is likely to be some deferred payments in relation to smaller developments, but it is important to note it is a deferral, not a non-payment. Surcharges are discretionary in any case, and we would be unlikely to apply them where a small business has financial difficulties were clearly related to COVID-19. The scheme waives late payment in interest, which would be mandatory under normal circumstances for a deferred period. On the whole, it's not anticipated that this particular scheme will impede delivery of the council's capital programme or climate emergency programme, and is in line with the council's other measures to help support small businesses survive the pandemic. And I will send that to you, Gary.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a supplementary, Gary?
Yeah, so can you say that all again, please, Wayne? The supplementary is very brief. Thanks very much for that. It really is helpful, and it really should have said what impact has on our ability, not what impact will. And from your answer, it's fairly clear that to date it has no impact. I would be interested in being kept up to date should you end up in a situation where we do get into problems with developers. But thank you very much for the answer.
I'll send it over to you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anglemaker.
Yes, thank you, John. My question is to you as leader of the council. Individuals and families living in poverty are not identified as one of the 9 protected characteristics under the Equalities Act of 2010. However, council decisions and actions often impact on individuals and families, frequently offering vital practical support, but sometimes in ways that could potentially cause harms and unintended consequences. Is there a process, perhaps something similar to our borough equalities impact assessments, that WBC can apply to ensure that impacts of WBC policy proposals and actions on the poorest in our community will always be explicitly considered, documented, and given a significant weighting in the policy making process? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I seem to have lost it. Andrew, thank you very much for the question. Poverty is a terrible blight, and it is vital that it remains in the forefront of our thinking, in particular as the impact of COVID-19 continues to be felt on all our economy. And so I'm grateful to you for this question. There is a fundamental difference between the protected characteristics you mention and poverty, which is that we will always aim to eradicate poverty, to prevent it and help people out of it, whereas the 9 characteristics are to be protected at the least, and in many ways to be cherished and celebrated. This means the 2 things are different categories and must be considered differently. But in other ways, your point is valid. In particular, we recognise the need to understand poverty better so as to guide our policies appropriately. We need to know of its causes so that we can prevent it, its impacts so that we can mitigate them, and its escape routes so that we can support people through them. That is why we're developing our bank of local insight and knowledge to understand the complete complexity of poverty in the borough, so that this understanding can drive more informed decision and policy making and reinforce our approach to this complex issue. We are not starting from scratch with this. The Council's community engagement team, previously community development workers, have for many years operated in our more deprived areas, building up invaluable local contacts and understanding, as well as supporting people and neighbourhoods to become stronger and more self-sufficient. And we have also always sought to prevent, mitigate and tackle poverty in practical ways. For example, through the work of the early help team with targeted families by providing food bank vouchers and by back to work and employment advice and support. So our work on poverty will be guided by this combination of on-the-ground knowledge, data analysis and existing good practice in order to better respond to what we know will be a growing issue due to the impact of COVID-19 already mentioned. Do you have a supplementary, Andrew?
Yes, I do. And thank you very much for that very informed answer. Unfortunately, as you stated, the pandemic means that it is likely that poverty is going to rise further in our borough. You have mentioned the community engagement team and the early help team, but where within the WBC organisational chart does monitoring of poverty levels and the impacts of WBC policies and actions on poverty currently fit? If possible, can you please provide the name of a specific officer and or role with primary responsibility for this activity?
I think within the arrangements that we're now just about to put in again for the second wave, I think the officer who would be responsible for poverty would be the chief executive and the councillor would be myself. We are very alive to the issue that as we go into the second wave, there will be parts of the community which will suffer more than others, and we have to be on that case all the time. So Andrew, it's a very pertinent question and one which we're considering all the time now that we're in the second wave. Thank you very much for asking the question. Prue.
Thank you, John. This question was put in, I think there's been an announcement since it was put in on this, but it's still relevant. So the ban on private landlords evicting tenants facing financial hardship because of the pandemic is likely to come to an end soon. Has Woking Borough Council done any modelling of what the impact would be in terms of numbers of people in the borough would need to rehome in order to fulfil our statutory requirements to the homeless?
Thank you, Prue, for the question. I mean, the ban on evictions was extended to the 20th of September, from when the courts were able to start considering claims made by landlords and the process towards eviction could start. Although the ban's come to an end, landlords now have to give their tenants a minimum of 6 months notice, notice period to leave their properties after an eviction notice is issued. However, if there are serious mitigating factors such as antisocial behaviour, fraud or domestic abuse, then the notice period will be only 4 weeks, or in the case of domestic abuse, 2 weeks. And I'm sure you would agree that if a woman's living with a man, or the other way round, you would not want them living together for more than 2 weeks. During the COVID pandemic, our team, and you've obviously been in the meeting today with Tulip, the teams continued to work with landlords and tenants to try and support both parties to resolve any issues threatening those tenancies, and will continue to assist those who are at the threat of homelessness in this way, as our statutory duty asks. For our work with landlords and tenants over the past few months, we are not aware of any significant number of pending eviction cases. However, our Homeless Reduction Act specialists will continue to monitor the situation and carry out some more detailed modelling in October. The intelligence and modelling will be reported through to our multi-agency and cross-directive, and no doubt will turn up, also being spoken about at our tenants, the tenants meeting. Local housing coordination cell for consideration. The group has overseen our successful approach to tackling rough sleepers and homelessness during the pandemic. Again, it was at the meeting today. I think when they did the last count, we had 4 people in the borough that is homeless, which is probably what most boroughs can only dream of. The supplementary, Prue?
Yep, I do have a supplementary, and it was pleasing today to hear that since we've been able to get some government funding in April, we have managed to make some progress on particularly on rough sleepers. But given where we are and the modelling that is being done to see how we can take this forward short term and long term, I wondered what analysis is being done as part of that modelling of the people who may be presenting as homeless, as to whether there are any groups that are particularly at risk of losing their homes or becoming rough sleepers. And I'm particularly, but not solely, thinking about this in the context of Black Lives Matter, and whether we are actually looking at the ethnicity of people as well as disability, sexual orientation and so on, to check that there isn't a problem anywhere in the system, or that there isn't something we could do better to help particular groups.
My response to that, Prue, is as you would expect, housing allocation is colourblind, and anybody who applies for a home is treated in the same way. If we were to find that there was an ethnic aspect to we're seeing disproportionate people from different cultural backgrounds or ethnicities, we would actually have to start to record that, and I think that's a very good idea. And when I see Simon, I'll be asking him if he can just make a point of making sure that we understand that's going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Lindsay, to John.
Yes. Good evening all. My question is to John Kaiser. Can you advise what the reserves of the council are at this time, i.e. week commencing 21st of September 2020? Thank you.
Okay. I mean, in March this year, the government pledged, sorry, I'm just, right, I've got 2 answers for this actually, right. Although we're monitoring the general balance at least monthly and adjust for supplementary estimates and known pressures, the council does not keep a running balance of all reserves throughout the year. But as part of our monitoring, we produce a forecast at the position of the year end to assist with future budget setting. That when I bring it along to the council, to the executive, and we talk about the monitoring. Balance reserves on the 31st of March 2020. I can tell you they are on page 18 of our draft accounts, which are available on the council website. These show a general fund reserves of 12,000,000.43, which is in the general reserve, and earmarked reserves of 91,000,000.52. The forecast general fund reserve balance at the end of the financial year in the monitoring currently, as reported in Q1, the executive was 5.01 million. The main reason for the drop was the approved carry forward last year of 2.7 million and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. A revised estimate of Q2 will be reported on at the executive in October, which should see an improved position due to the additional funding from the government for COVID-19 costs and a better understanding of the financial pressures. The 2020-21 annual budget includes a net contribution to the earmarked reserves of 1.5 million, so they're actually going up. Your supplementary?
Yes, John said he had a second answer. Could I have his other answer, please?
Yeah, the other answer, basically, Lindsay, is that things are. It was only one paragraph actually where we changed paragraph. I just, but basically, where we are at the moment is we feel that we are well placed compared with other councils. But I think you've heard it many times before that. When we were looked at, and there's a report that was issued by Maidenhead and Maidenhead Borough, which showed us having the 10th best reserves of any unitary in the country.
I did specifically ask what the reserves were for this week. You give me a figure that's a different one, but never mind. I take that. If you know what they are of this week, you could write to me. Thanks.
Lindsay, as I said to you, we don't keep a running balance. What we do is we look at the end of each year. So when we do our update, you'll see in October, it will show you what we're predicting, what next year's will be.
Not what we had previously earlier this year.
Well, what do you think we had previously?
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Evening, thank you. And this is to John as well. There still appears to be a lack of clarity and commitment from the government to long-term funding for council COVID-related expenditures. Some of these vital activities that the council has funded from its own resources are particularly important for less economically well-off members of our borough. Does the council share this concern, and if so, what practical actions can be taken to address this issue, and particularly to avoid cuts that could disproportionately harm the poorest, forced upon the council by insufficient government support?
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I mean, in March this year, the government pledged to support local authorities through the COVID-19 pandemic. They've made available 4.3 billion to local authorities, and Wokingham Borough has received a direct support in the form of direct grant of 8.3 million. In addition to the government had announced a variety of other measures, some offering financial support such as 75p in the pound, compensation for loss of income, to passported grants to the local businesses and care providers, and also deferring payments to assist with cash flow issues. That said, the council has had to front fund a significant amount of support to residents, suppliers, partners such as places for leisure and care providers. And this will impact on the council's general fund, hence why we are forecasting 5.1 million for the end of the year. The money it holds to cover such crises, which is reserves, obviously, wherever effort is being made by the council officers to secure funding to cover these pressures and manage the costs down, it is still anticipated that the council's general balance will be depleted at year end. Furthermore, the impact of COVID-19 does not fall neatly into 1 year, and as such, the impact will be felt strongly as we formulate our budgets for 21-22 and beyond. I can assure the councillors that the residents of the borough that we will continue to make representation to government for funding. We need in both this year and for future years. In addition, we will need to continue with our different measures of financial management to target expenditure where it is most needed, which is those that are suffering most financially. We seek value for money, as in all we do. We try to be efficient and be innovative and work with partners to create the most efficient service delivery options. Work is already underway on setting the medium-term financial plan, which will be coming to overview and scrutiny in the not too distant future for the next 3 years. And officers are working to maintain a financially sustainable council with a balanced budget while maintaining the impact on residents. Inevitably, this, with all councils at this time, having to make some difficult decisions, which will make targeting of resources to those the most in need even greater and a greater imperative. As stated, a second wave of the virus will only make matters worse. And of course, what we've seen in the last couple of days, we're nowhere near out of the woods. I think it's very important that people understand if we as a council don't control our costs and maintain our costs, we will be broke. And if we're broke, we are no good to anybody. Now, have you a supplementary, Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that answer. By way of trying to replenish our reserves in due course, is it likely that council-related services are to see an increase in cost to people using those services? And if so, are there any measures in place or could be put in place that would help those that are from poorer backgrounds?
Well, there are a number of ways that the council raise money. One of them is via investments, another one's via fees and from council tax. Council tax is capped, and so there is only so much we can raise with that. And a number of the services we provide, we are only allowed to cover the costs of those services, especially if they're statutory. So we can only raise those in line with probably inflation or what we're experiencing. There are opportunities to raise some of our other fees where we are we offer pretty good value for money, but we understand during this time everybody's going to be in the same situation, and wherever we possibly can, we will make concessions, as we are looking to do at this current moment. And there's a consultation going out with the council tax discount scheme, and that will be coming forward shortly to show you what we're doing with that.
Thank you very much.
Rochelle.
Hello, John. This is for Wayne, probably. Why is there 100 houses around the SEN school application rather than someplace else?
That wasn't the question. The question is, why are the 100 unrelated houses added into a plan for the badly needed special
SEN school? Yeah. Yes.
You're trying to trick me, Rochelle.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Right, here we go. So, good evening, Rochelle. The council has been working very closely with the Department of Education and our colleagues at Reading Borough Council to identify a suitable location for the much needed new SEN school. Having reviewed the council's land holdings, it is proposed the site of the school will be on land at Winnish Farm adjacent to Wheatfield Primary School. It is anticipated that a detailed planning application for the SEN school will be submitted in January next year. The application will be for the SEN school only and not include any housing. And I'm sure you'll be on the planning committee when that one comes through. However, as you are very aware, the consultation draft for the local plan, which was earlier in the year in February, proposes the allocation of land at Winnish Farm for around 250 homes across both council and privately owned land in that area. The proposed number of new homes was adjusted downwards to account for the potential new school, as I've just mentioned. A separate application, outline application for housing on the remaining council land, is likely to be submitted in the early part of next year for consideration, which will obviously, both of them, go to planning committee. Sorry.
And before you ask, John, yes, I do have a supplementary.
Sorry, do you have a supplementary, Rochelle? I was muted.
Okay. When is the local plan update committee going to be meeting next to consider all of these problems that we have, including the extra 100 houses?
That's an absolute brilliant question, because I was with Nigel and Ian last week, and I've asked them to put a timetable out over the next week to get a plan and get some dates in the diary to start that, so we can go back to where we were, look at what's happened and look at the options. So diary date should be coming out, where are we now? Potentially tomorrow or Monday. And you'll obviously be included in that, along with Lindsay and the rest of the working group. So yes, very soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Way out of time, but Richard, just ask your question quickly if you can.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'll do is I'll just cut it right down then. Okay.
Read the whole question.
All right. Okay. This is in relation to the proposal to build the SENS school in Winnersh. There's much clinical evidence published that shows that major highways have an adverse effect on the health and well-being of children who live near or attend schools adjacent to major highways, both from the failing air quality and from noise pollution. I've no doubt that any new build design will mitigate against noise, but children are not just confined to just four walls. As a SEN teacher, I became acutely aware of how sensitive some children can be and how debilitating this can be for them. Worryingly, the council is proposing to build a school next to one of the busiest and expanding motorways in the UK, which again, research has shown has a greatest impact on the health of our residents because of poor air quality. Anything above 100 on the boundaries between index points for each pollutant is harmful. Therefore, will the council conduct extensive air quality monitoring exercises and publish its results before any planning approval is considered? I'm sure you agree safeguarding our children is paramount.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your question. First of all, it is great news that we are able to work with the Department for Education and Reading Borough in bringing forward a much needed and welcomed facility in Wokingham Borough. We are of course conscious of the potential air quality and noise issues surrounding the site, and our technical teams have already carried out initial impact assessments, and it demonstrated that the noise and air quality levels were acceptable. So these assessments have helped us identify the best location for the school to the western end of the site, which is furthest away from the motorway and adjacent to the existing Wheatfield Primary School. All these studies have been carried out in association with the Department for Education, and they are also satisfied that the levels are acceptable. Furthermore, more detailed studies will be carried out by the Department for Education as part of the planning application process, and will then be considered by the local planning authority, which of course is us.
Okay, thank you. I have got a supplementary question. Obviously, I'm pleased that some monitoring has already taken place. However, this is not the first time that a similar concern has been raised. The Executive Member for Environment on the 23rd of February 2017 replied to a residents' question regarding pollutants associated with the M4 motorway at Winnersh. The Executive Member quoted the government's warning of the uncertainties, including increased traffic, and an order to monitor concentrations of pollution off the M4. In light of those uncertainties and the possibility of pollution levels exceeding the air quality index value of 100, that's the safe level. Anything above that, then children with special needs will actually suffer, and noise levels rising above 50 decibels, again, children with special needs will suffer anything above that. Can we really be confident that Warren Farm and the area that you've identified next to the other primary school is a safe location now and into the future as a site for children with learning disabilities and with comorbid conditions? Once built, there's no turning back.
Well, as I have already explained, we have done some assessments already. The Department of Education is involved, and I am certain they will ensure that the school will be put in a place where no child will be put in any danger in any shape or form.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you.
Andy, last question. Keep it brief.
You just had me on the cusp of doing something else. It's very, very quick. What sort of local authority builds a SEND school next to one of the busiest motorways in the country?
Okay, I'll take that. And I'll try not to go over any of the points that Avula Karim's already made. But the development of a SEND school in Winnersh is a welcome one and will provide valuable contribution to both education for children with SEND within the borough, but also in terms of reduction of out-of-borough placements that can both be disruptive, add to the family and cost the council money. We are very conscious of the potential air quality and noise issues surrounding the site, and I can advise that the technical teams have already carried out the initial impact, as Avula Karim has already mentioned. During the master planning process, which demonstrates the noise and air noise levels are acceptable. So these assessments will help us identify the best location for the school at the western end of the site, which is the furthest from the motorway and adjacent to the existing Wheatfield Primary School. All of these studies have been carried out in association with the Department of Education, who are similarly satisfied with the levels that are acceptable. Furthermore, and further detailed studies will be carried out by the Department of Education as part of the planning application process and will be considered by the local authority early next year.
Thank you. Do you have a quick supplementary, Andy? Because we're way out of time.
Thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate the extra time, John. I guess my issue is, and I think Richard's already touched on it, is this school is going to be there for 100 years, and for 100 years, people are not going, whatever the studies say, people are not going to understand why a school has been built there. So you've spoken about the best location for the school, but that's the best location on the site. We should be looking for the best location in the borough, because I can't think of any worse location than next to a motorway.
Question, Andy.
That was the question. That was the question, John. I can't think of a worse location than next to a motorway. Can you?
Well, this wasn't the only site that was considered, and it was obviously considered with the Department of Education and with our colleagues at Reading Borough Council. So it wasn't just that we said this is the only site available, so this is where it's going to go. So in the answer to your question, it wasn't the only site considered.
But it's not the best site. But thank you very much.
That is question time. Thank you very much. Could I remind members and members of the public that they should not speak thereafter. The meeting is closed to members who are not members of the executive. Charles, Substance Misuse Service.
Thank you, John. So the proposal that's in front of the executive tonight relates to the Substance Misuse Service. This is a statutory requirement on Woking Borough Council, which has to provide this service for residents to support, obviously, treatments against drugs and alcohol, or things of that nature. The situation at the moment is there has been a current provider in place for a while. In March 2020, they've served WBC with notice, advised they'd been subsidising the service from their charitable reserve for some time and could no longer sustain this position. An agreement was reached to support them temporarily to get to a place where we could actually go out to tender, benchmark the service and have a proper look at this again. And make sure that the new provider, when one was sought, was to the appropriate level and had the funding in place to provide the service needed. We benchmarked heavily on this, basically, and the proposal in front of executive tonight for the increase in funding proposed is on that basis. So happy to take any questions.
For myself, I would like to support the paper. I think that it's proposing the right thing to do. Any other comments? No. And without further ado, those in favour? Well, I'll do the other way around. Is anybody against? Pauline, put your hand down. Anybody against? No, thank you. Carried unanimously. Thanks, Charles. Moving on. The next is the special needs school at Ullakrin. Ullakrin?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm seeking the executive's support for the development of a new special educational needs school in Winnish, and I'm seeking the approval of the lease to the Department for Education for a period of 125 years. You're already aware of this school, which is going to be a free school, and it will have 150 pupils, 75 pupils from Wokingham Borough Council and 75 from Reading Borough Council. It will be paid for by the Department for Education, and it will be run by the Maiden Early Trust. So happy to answer any questions if anything is not clear in the papers you have been given.
Any questions?
No, just to say it was a very clear paper, and thank you. I'm pleased with this.
John Kaiser.
Ullakrin, could you confirm whether or not it was the favourite site by the Department of Education?
Yes, it was the favourite site.
Okay, and of course the truth is that pollution is falling all the time. I mean, we're going to see the demise. Andy talked about 100 years. Well, we're going to see a demise of internal combustion engines. The government have promised to outlaw them being sold new by 2030, I think it is. Yeah. So by the time we get to 100, I guess if there are any cars by then, they will all be electric.
We will all be flying, perhaps.
Possibly.
Any other questions? No. Can I ask whether anybody in the executive is against this paper? No. Anybody abstaining? No. Then I can assume that everybody is in favour.
Thank you very much.
Ullakrin. Procurement of commercial property owners insurance cover, John.
Thank you, John. This is basically a bit of housekeeping. I mean, what we're trying to do here is we now are looking at some of the properties that we own that we're renting, and as you would expect of any competent and caring landlord, we want to ensure it is properly insured. The reason it's here is because of the size of the premium, and we've decided that we are going to approach it in a slightly different way. In the past, we've had a number of policies running. We are looking to go for a policy via a broker, who will then give us total cover across the assets the council owns. So the premium, as you can see, is between £450,000 and £625,000 over 5 years. So that requires the executive approval. But I'm sure there's nobody on the executive that suggests we don't insure our properties. That's it, really.
Any questions from Gregor?
John, as the insurance applies to many buildings that we have bought as part of our investment fund, can you just tell me how much borrowing the council has and how much income it generates?
Yeah, just bear with me, Gregor, and I'll just basically, I'm just having a look at it at the moment. I mean, our net general fund external debt is on the, and this is March 21st, is £121 million. We also have £84 million, which is money that we've borrowed to buy our own social housing, but that actually generates £15 million worth of income each year in the way of rent and gives us total control of our housing. In addition, we have £134 million of internal debt. Now, that's money that we lend to ourselves. I know that sounds a bit strange, but that's what we do. And we also have on deposit at this moment, council's money on deposit with a lot of it with other councils and invested in secure bonds, and that's another 180 million. So if you looked at that 180 million, take that off, and that brings us down to a net borrowing of 121 million pounds. And even if you add in HRA, that still only takes it to about 204 million pounds. Out of interest, the cost of financing debt falling on the taxpayer for 2020-2021 will actually be around about £7.50 per band D, which is 0.4%, so it's less than 1%. And of course, the total assets that we've got as a council is about £1,000 million worth, so it's more than covered by our asset value. We looked at, and of course we have the town centre regeneration, we have PIG, which contributing a substantial amount of money, and now WHL is beginning to motor forward. So all these things generate income for the council.
Yeah, any other questions? No? Thank you very much, John. All those in favour, do not put your hands up. Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? No, then carried. Gregor, the Help to Heat scheme, please.
Thank you, John. With your permission, I'd just like to take a couple of seconds to introduce this paper. So there is an obvious environmental benefit to this programme that I'm sure everybody can see. Improving the energy efficiency of some of our least efficient homes will help reduce carbon and waste energy usage. But there's also another benefit to this project that I want to draw members' attention to. 1 in 10 households in the UK are affected by fuel poverty. For many that do, winter brings with it a heartbreaking choice: eating or heating. This programme aims to help alleviate the effects of fuel poverty, not by one-off supply of money, but by funding home upgrades aimed at improving a home's energy efficiency and consequently dramatically cutting home energy costs. Across Woking Borough, there are approximately 1,800 houses with an energy rating of E, F and G, the 3 lowest EPC energy efficiency ratings. The difference between heating identically sized 3-bedroom houses rated G versus D is £516 a year or £43 a month. That's 27% saving. Unfortunately, many of these E, F and G houses are currently part of the HRA stock, and as a result are currently occupied by some of the lowest income, most vulnerable, eldest or most at risk in our community. These are also the households that are therefore least likely to be able to undertake the energy improvement measures otherwise. With this programme, we are accessing the Energy Companies Obligation Fund and using that money to pay for energy saving upgrades to properties with absolutely no cost paid by the resident and with 100% of the savings kept by them. As part of this scheme, areas where we know that there are fuel poverty will be specifically targeted with hand-delivered letters advertising the scheme. Residents in these areas will be invited to apply, so until they've received that letter, there is no action for them to take. There will also be an extensive media and PR campaign. Using the Energy Companies Obligation Fund, we could potentially help up to 400 houses across our borough this year, and there's also the potential to help more homes into the future. This is a fantastic programme, Mr. Chairman, and one that can make a significant difference to the lives of many across our borough by helping alleviate the impact of fuel poverty on a number of our residents. I recommend to members of the executive that this paper be adopted and the required measures be implemented.
Thank you very much, Gregor. Any questions? Pauline.
Not really a question, but just to say that I think this is a really brilliant idea. I don't know how you came up with it, but well done.
There are some fantastic officers within our council, Pauline, that have gone out and investigated this and brought it forward and brought it to life. They've worked hugely diligently, and they deserve a vote of thanks for what they're about to do for our community. They really do.
Yeah.
So I would like to recommend that we approve it. Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? Then I can assume then everybody is in favour. Thank you very much. And that, I believe, ends the executive meeting. And now we move on to the extraordinary meeting. So thank you very much. The apologies of absence are Stuart. Any declarations of interest? No. Right, public question time. Everybody gets a... So, Wesley Budd, is he here?
Yes, hi there.
Hello. Can you put your camera on?
Yep.
Hello, Wesley. Ask your question away, please.
Yes, I thank the executive for discussing tonight the possibility of purchasing a limited number of COVID-19 tests. I believe that one figure that was been muted is that each test could cost around £100. If the kits are purchased, as I hope they will be, will WBC pursue all avenues possible to try to recover all of these costs from the government? Thank you.
Charles.
Thank you for your question. An important point to make here is that the price includes the whole testing service and not just the test kit. So that means the kit, the courier to the lab processing, and public health having access to the test results. Because it's very important that any potential tests, the data is fed into the NHS track and trace system. We're only looking here to secure a backup supply should we have a significant situation such as an outbreak where there is a problem basically with the government testing routes. To answer your question directly, though, we will pursue all avenues for government funding, as we are doing with all the costs incurred directly or indirectly around COVID. Unfortunately, as you may know, extra funding from central government is currently not enough, basically, to cover all these costs. It's imperative we target our resources to where they're most needed, which is, we believe, the case with this critical testing initiative. I would say on top of that, that myself, the leader, the deputy leader are continuing to lobby our MPs and put as much pressure on for them to address this situation and resolve basically some of these funding issues.
Mr. Budd, have you a supplementary question, sir?
I don't, and thank you for your answer.
Thank you very much for coming, sir.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Al Neil, would you kindly switch off your camera, Mr. Budd? Thank you. Al Neil, is Al Neil here? Yes.
Yes.
Switch your camera on, sir. Thank you.
It is on, I think.
Yes, you are. You are. Please ask your question.
Right. Okay. Yes. Well, I welcome the proposals about purchasing these COVID-19 test kits. To be effective in stopping the spread of the virus, selecting those to be tested, carrying out the tests, and communicating the results are sort of time-critical tasks. So, is the council confident it has or can create rapidly the capacity to perform effectively these tasks?
That's me. Thank you for your question. As I said in my first reply, we're looking to purchase a small amount of our own kit should we have an emergency situation such as an outbreak in Wokingham and the national system cannot support us adequately. So it's a backup to mitigate the risk that we've seen coming through in the national media. We don't know how long the national system will currently take to recover. enough capacity, but this does seem to me like a sensible step to mitigate the risk to Wokingham residents. At the moment, the cases of COVID in Wokingham are relatively low. So between the national system and the local system and this backup provision, we're trying to do all we can basically to make sure that we're prepared, we're ready for whatever may come, and we're doing what we can to protect our residents. In terms of speed, the provision we're looking at securing, if we have to use it, is a 48-hour response. It can get to 24 hours in urgent situations. So we're confident it will be timely and timely. And, as I said before, all the data, one of the key things for us, that any data via this that we collected was fed into the NHS system, basically, so that any evidence that was accrued could be used generally in the fight against COVID.
Have you got a supplementary, Mr. Neil?
No, thank you. That's a very good answer. Yeah, and I'm glad that we're taking a local responsibility for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mike Smith. How nice to hear from you.
Good evening, John. I think my camera is on, as is my microphone.
Neil, could you take your camera off, please, sir? Ask your question, Mike, please. If I might call you Mike.
Yeah, Mike, please. Michael was only ever used by my mother when I was in trouble. The report accompanying the agenda refers specifically to residents of Wokingham, yet many of our key workers live outside of the borough. Will these tests be available to both residents and non-residents who are key workers in our borough?
Thank you for your question. The national testing system run by the government is obviously available to all who need it. This includes anyone who develops symptoms of COVID-19, and it also includes targeted asymptomatic testing of NHS, social care staff and care home residents. In addition, essential workers can apply for priority testing through the government website, and a small amount of testing kits have been supplied to each local school. We're not aiming with this to replace this system, but as anyone who reads the papers or listens to the TV knows, this system is having well-publicised capacity problems. What we're doing is purchasing additional spare capacity to deploy in emergency situations such as an outbreak, as directed by our public health consultant, for hopefully what will be a short period of time until the national system recovers. It would be wrong for me at this stage to rule specific groups in or out of this, as we don't know what this situation will be. And the current situation is so fluid and fast moving. I would love to be able to tell you exactly where it will be in 2 weeks' time, but we can't. So therefore, these tests will be managed in situations in Wokingham if we cannot secure enough capacity by the national route first. If there were residents outside of Wokingham that couldn't get tested, and it was critical they did for the management and health of the people of Wokingham, we would consider it. But what I would say basically at the moment is, rates of COVID in Wokingham are around the rate per 1,000 is around a third of the national UK average. Now, the central government provision, while it's limited, is obviously being directed to areas of higher risk. So at the moment, basically, if there was an outbreak in an area of higher risk, it's more likely that the government system is going to be stronger there than it is currently in Wokingham, which is currently a very low risk area. And we obviously hope it stays that way.
Thank you. Mike, do you have another question?
I do, but to some extent, the reply has answered some of it. It's much appreciated that WBC are trying to chart a path through the chaos created by confusing messages and ineffective action from central government. I understand the initial tranche is going to be 500 tests. So it doesn't seem to me a very high number. For example, I'm a volunteer at the RBH and I live in Wokingham. Would I be eligible for one of these tests? Should I need one? Or would a refuse collector? Looking wider, what roles are you defining as key workers, please?
I think the figure of 500 and the figure of 1,000 for the original commitment was done following quite a bit of study into what we thought consumption would be, but as I've or would be or could be. But as I've already said, basically, it's very difficult to anticipate the situation, which is fluid and ever changing. And, we will continue to review going forwards where we are and what's going on. All of the potential tests that should executive approve that we're looking to move forward with have got a 12-month shelf life. So there's plenty of time to get through them. and we hope obviously we'll get near to that level. In terms of your specific question about who would be eligible or who wouldn't, I think, what I would say to that at the moment is it's impossible for me to give a strict definition on that right now, because the situation is ever changing. The judgment would be made basically based on A, can the national system cope? And obviously, if it can cope, if it is providing an appropriate response, then none of this applies. B, if it cannot cope, what would any steps we take in whatever that situation would be, lower the risk of an outbreak spreading and control it basically in Wokingham? And obviously that's going to depend on the scenario at the time. Now, we can all make educated guesses about how we think this is going to play out over the next few months and where the greatest elements of risk are. But, with no disrespect intended, they are at the moment educated guesses. And we've set up a system within the council that each situation would be judged by the public health consultant, the director of adult services, senior leadership of the council, with me and the leader obviously having oversight of it, and it will be judged on its merit. So I can't give you a specific criteria today, but I hope you understand the reasons why.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May I add, our central mission is to keep our residents safe and our vulnerable safe. So if we have to have an extraordinary executive meeting every week to approve something, we will do so.
Okay, thank you very much. I would add that there is an unpleasant Facebook remark on the early residents discussion group saying, "Oh, I bet council workers and the councillors are first in the queue." You might want to refute that.
I can completely refute that.
Thank you.
Completely. Absolute nonsense.
I'll be happy to comment.
Thank you very much, Mike. Lindsay, that's the end of public questions and members' questions. Lindsay.
Thank you. As the leader of the council knows, we fully support this proposal, having had a discussion beforehand, and I think it is a very good insurance policy, and all credit to the council. My question is, what criteria protocol is going to be used to decide who receives a WBC funded test, particularly if there are a number of people or areas who may need such a test?
Okay, thank you. And Lindsay, I'm grateful for your support on this, basically, so thank you for that. Answer to your question, I have answered this some of already, but I'll go over it again happily. So the purchase of the test for WBC is being proposed within the context of the significant capacity problems within the national track and trace system. WBC tests will be reserved for emergency situations where there's a risk of a significant outbreak within Wokingham and the national testing cannot be rapidly deployed, or wherever lack of national testing poses a risk to the capacity of local authority services, which, as we all know, are vital to deal with some of the aged and vulnerable in the community, et cetera, people who really need our support. The decision about when to use WBC testing will be made by WBC Public Health Lead Ingrid Slade, Director of Adult Social Care Matt Pope, in consultation with WBC Senior Management and the lead member for Wellbeing and Adult Services, which is obviously me, and obviously the leader. I think, in terms of criteria, for the reasons I've just said to Mike Smith, for me to give you, because I can make an educated guess of where we'll be in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, but I've got no way of knowing that. And all the evidence from part one of COVID taught us basically that what we expected to happen didn't happen, and a lot of things we didn't expect did happen. So I think the key here is just to keep watching, talking, meeting regularly, basically, and planning as we go. And I'm more than happy to keep you, your group, and the independents informed of any significant changes going forwards.
Lindsay, may I say that you will be involved?
Thank you.
The supplementary question.
Yes. When will these be available?
Well, should executive approve tonight, basically what we did at the end of last week is reserved some capacity because we had to secure actually an early date. Obviously, if we've left it a week, I think 2 days after we inquired, strangely enough, the NHS were on the phone to this company. So I'll leave that to you, to what you may think of that. But we were very anxious that we didn't wait a week or two and, end up going back a month basically in delivery date. The answer to your question is we're hopeful if executive approval tonight, they'll be available from very early October.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will take the unusual step of asking Andy Croy's question on his behalf because he's had to leave for reasons that I've no idea. The question was to Charles. The initial lockdown saw large numbers of people finally recognised as key workers. While NHS and caring staff were clearly always in this category, the lockdown made us realise that shop workers, refuse collection, postal workers and many others were also key workers. The paper is not clear on exactly which key workers and which schools, maintained schools, fee-paying schools, private schools will be eligible for testing. Can the executive member outline the range of other key workers and schools for whom it is anticipated testing will be made available?
Thank you. This answer is, I have covered most of it before, but I'll happily go over it again in answer to the question. The government national testing scheme is available to all who need it. This includes anyone who develops symptoms of COVID-19 and also includes asymptomatic testing of NHS, social care staff and care home residents. In addition, essential workers can apply for a priority testing through the government website. As part of this, all schools have small supply kits already. We're not replacing this system, but we know that this system is having well publicised problems. What we are hoping to do is purchase additional spare capacity to deploy in emergency situations such as an outbreak, as directed by our public health consultant, for hopefully a short period of time till the national situation recovers. It would be wrong for me to rule specific groups in or out at this stage, as we just can't anticipate what these potential situations will be.
Thank you very much, Charles. Obviously, there's no supplementary question there. May we go on to the main body of the executive, and thank you, members and members of the public. The meeting is now closed to you. Charles.
Sure. So obviously we've talked about this for the last few minutes, but this paper is asking executive to support the acquisition basically of a certain amount of COVID testing for the protection of as a backup supply to protect the residents of Wokingham from the situation we face. I'm not going to repeat things I've already said, but just to run over how we listed our requirements to explain this to people. It's a contingency plan to enable us to test all educational key workers should they be unable to access testing through NHS track and trace and there is risk to schools' capacity. A contingency plan to enable us to test other key workers as required should they be unable to access testing through standard routes. Contingency plan to enable us to implement rapid testing at the onset of an outbreak if testing via NHS track and trace is not available. Based on the initial data provided by our schools and considering the possible likely size of local outbreaks, we've estimated we'll need at least 500 tests with the capacity to increase to 1,000 tests at a future point. The testing process to be effective, it includes the test, but also a simple process of transfer within 48 hours and notification of the test to Public Health England. The supplier we've selected can deliver 500 to 1,000 test kits at a lead time of a week. Each kit has the instructions enclosed. Each kit has a shelf life of 12 months. Tests will need to be returned to the lab in the packaging provided using the prepaid self-addressed envelope. Specialist fully trained scientists will analyse and advise the result within 48 hours. If it's an urgent case, we may be able to get it in 24 hours. That lab works over the weekend, so it's a 7-day service, and all test results will be notified to positive ones. Will be notified to Public Health England, so that it's linked into the track and trace system. And quite simply, basically, it's approved by the NHS. I've seen the approval certificates from several other boards abroad, which I've never even heard of. But I believe this is the right thing to do, a proactive step. Obviously in April we were in a situation with PPE where the government system couldn't perform. We had to step in then and intervene, and obviously with our appeal to the public for help and our private provision that we set up then. In May, we had the situation with the NHS in the Royal Berks where they were discharging people with COVID without testing them into our care homes, and we had to step in and intervene again to stop that happening. And this I see as a similar measure designed literally to help protect our residents for some of the risks which are paramount due to the failure of the national testing system. So I'm happy to take any questions. That's it from me for now.
Any questions? John?
Yeah, can I just say, I don't like spending the residents' money, but we've been asked a number of questions tonight with regards to supporting the vulnerable. I can't think of anybody more vulnerable than the people in our care homes and in the schools, and not making available this emergency supply, I think would be irresponsible. And I would say it's even more and I would say the comment it's for the council and the council workers is an even more irresponsible remark.
I agree, John. I have nothing to add to that. I agree.
Charlotte?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to lend my support fully to this scheme, and I'd just like to make a remark also about making it fully accessible at the weekend times to get the tests in the first place. I say this because with the kits that have been coming out from the government sent by post, it can take 48 hours to receive those, and that if you have got COVID and you're trying to protect the most vulnerable is quite a long time. The other thing that I wanted to make a remark about is there's been a case this week that was quite prominent on the radio about a school, and they were unable to access enough tests, which meant, and it came over last weekend, and it did mean that because they couldn't access enough tests, and also they weren't able to access advice over that weekend, and they had one teacher off with COVID. It did mean that they were a small primary at the time, that they had to close the entire school. They were a northern primary school, and just because of one teacher having COVID, it meant it had a huge impact on their local community. And I wouldn't want to see this happening in our local community, and I think that this is a fantastic thing that we're able to do here. But I just want to reiterate that, by having these tests, it does mean that we should be able to do it quickly and should be able to alleviate this happening. But it is essential that it happens very quickly and that we are able to offer the correct advice in a timely fashion to make it effective.
I fully agree with that, Charlotte. I mean, what we're talking about here is a 7-day service, basically performance within 48 hours. And obviously we're going to be monitoring that very closely. And, coming back to your other point, I deeply regret that we're having to take this step. It's not something I want to do. I know myself and the leadership of adult services want to get on with dealing with all the other things we want to do rather than covering basically for the inadequacies in the national system. But, one thing we learned from this earlier this year is we have a duty to respond basically, and we can't just stand on the other side of the street. And, I'm an optimistic person, and we're hoping for the best with this situation. We're hoping none of this gets called upon, basically, but we're also planning for the worst, so that we've got steps in place and we can deal with situations, should NHS Track and Trace not be able to perform that you described with the school you mentioned.
Thank you, Charles.
Chairman.
John?
Chairman. Have we lost you?
Sorry, I thought I was talking, Gregor. I thought you were silent, not me.
Great, thank you, John. No, Charles, I mean, I was just going to echo something that that has already been said, which is, taking the lessons from the PPE issues that we had earlier on in the year. It would be remiss of us not to take precautions in this circumstances, And I was just wondering if there was any way that you could tell us what the current COVID level is across Woking Borough, and then what you think the likely scenarios for the coming months are going to be.
Sure, no, happily. I mean, currently we are at a very low level of COVID. Our cases are around a third. Cases per 1,000 are around a third of the national average. So currently, as I said, things are looking good. Our track and trace is not far off 90%, which is also encouraging. But if I'm being honest with members, one can't deny that the national picture is getting worse. And it's likely that over months ahead, we're going to face continued outbreaks. And the focus of myself and the entire department, and indeed the senior leadership team of the council, is on planning for these eventualities, as I said, so that we're ready and in position to deal with them as soon as we can. We are getting some of our own track and trace capability in a few weeks, where we will accept responsibility for dealing with people who the NHS system cannot deal with. For me, that's a good thing, because those elements will be in our control, and I have every confidence in our officers that they'll be able to deliver. So, as I said, I'm an optimistic person. I hope for the best, but I am expecting basically we are going to be facing further outbreaks across the community, hopefully at a very low level for the next few months. And what we will have to do is work together to make sure basically that the effects of these are mitigated as much as possible.
Right, well, no more questions then. Let me just summarise where we are. And firstly, thank Lindsay and his team for the support, as I failed to do on the planning matter the other night, and I apologise for that again. That we are recommending to approve a supplementary estimate of 120,000 for purchase of COVID swab test service for an emergency provision, and the other three recommendations. Is anybody against? Does anybody wish to abstain? So I can assume that the whole of the executive is in favour. Thank you very much, and thank you, and thank the public, and thank the other members for attending, and I'm sorry that it's gone on for so long. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Good night.